Danley, do you know what Keanu Reeves, Noam Chomsky, John Stossel, and Ron Paul all have in common?
No.
They've all signed a petition and are part of 500,000 signatures to free a man named Ross Ulbricht, who the media has known as the Dread Pirate Roberts. This is his story.
This call is from a federal prison.
I want you to understand what it means to lose your freedom.
29-year-old Ross William Ulbricht, a.k.a. Dread Pirate Robert.
I am not the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Operating a sophisticated illegal drug website.
I inherited the ship from the previous Dread Pirate Roberts, just as you inherited from me.
The FBI spent 2 years trying to find the man behind the site.
The man I inherited from was not the real Dread Pirate Roberts either. Then he explained that the name was the important thing in inspiring the necessary fit. You see, no one can surrender to the Dread Pirate.
Ross Ulbricht. I'll finally leave prison, but I'll be in a body bag.
Danley, do you remember the first time you saw The Princess Bride?
I was very young, and since then I've watched it over and over because it's a great movie. It's one of my favorites.
It's a classic, right? And it was the quintessential, like, if you were a 90s kid and you were homesick from school, you watched The Princess Bride because it was a story about a kid who was homesick from school that had a beautiful story within it. In a lot of cinematic circles, it's often thought of as the perfect movie because it's got a little bit of everything. There's espionage, there's plot twists, there's Billy Crystal as an old man named Miracle Max who brings back your hero. And so there's all of these incredible elements, but there's also romance and sword fighting and humorous dialogue and this beautiful story of a farm boy turned pirate turned hero. Cary Elwes does a phenomenal job of playing the character known as Wesley and also known as the Dread Pirate Roberts. Now, the story behind the Dread Pirate Roberts is Wesley explains to Buttercup, the princess, while they are going through the fire swamp, is that he inherited the name. He wasn't the real Dread Pirate Roberts, and the person that he inherited the name from was not the real Dread Pirate Roberts either, and the person that he passes the name on to will not be the real Dread Pirate Roberts. It's this sort of eternal legacy and mythos that is passed down from one person to the next, to the next, to the next.
He does mention people are more likely to surrender to the Dread Pirate Roberts rather than
the Dread Pirate Wesley.
Right. Yeah. That's the line he gives.
And
it's the name that has the power.
And so this character in this movie was something that is synonymous with a continual passing of the torch in order that the figure and the character live on forever. That you could have a 300-year reign on the high seas of the Dread Pirate Roberts. And so as his ship comes up, the immortal mythos of this man is something that anyone would have strike fear into their hearts. It's become more synonymous lately in the last several years with the case of Ross Ulbricht. Now, Ross Ulbricht in 2011 started a website known as the Silk Road. It was called the Silk Road. The Silk Road is historically is the major trade route that went from Asia to Europe. And it kind of converged at Antioch.
Yeah, it opened commerce between the two.
And the convergence at Antioch in particular was one that was so important because of what that meant from a historical factor, right? Is that Antioch became like this huge center of fashion and business and all of this because that was sort of where the Silk Road ended on the European side. Now, the Silk Road that Ross created was an e-commerce site. And it was based on a fundamental principle known as the non-aggression principle. And if you're familiar with the non-aggression principle simply states that two consenting adult parties could and should be allowed at any time to do what they wish as long as it does not hurt a third party.
So what does that look like?
So it would mean like if you or I were to want to exchange clothes, we should be able to do it because we're two consenting parties. But if we wanted to exchange...
It'll be a little tight on me. But...
Sure, right? It might not be an even trade.
Yeah.
But if we wanted to exchange, let's say, money for a personal usage amount of narcotics, we should also be able to do that as long as the agreement is between us.
Which is a growing libertarian thought.
It is. It's actually one of the
Philosophy.
governing principles of the libertarian philosophy. And that particular philosophy is one that was very near and dear to the heart of Ross. Now, Ross is a 26-year-old ideological young man, which we all remember when we were that age. That if you were to go back, and we've talked about this on our podcast several times, is that in 2008, I was a delegate at a political party.
Yeah.
I was campaigning feverishly for an organization that I no longer would want association with. Likewise, Ross has since come back and detracted now that he is, and we should mention this, in prison he's serving 2 life sentences plus 40 years.
Yep.
Essentially for the creation of this website.
Yep.
And furthermore, we should also note that that is double the life sentence of El Chapo.
Yeah.
Which
The murdering kingpin.
Ross was a first-time offender of a nonviolent crime and has been imprisoned for 2 life sentences plus 40 years, which is why he's got nearly 500,000 signatures on this petition. He's been in prison for 8 years, and that goes back to the beginning of starting the Silk Road. So the Silk Road was started in February of 2011, and Ross employed 2 major pieces of technology. I don't want to get bogged down in the details of what these things do, but it's important that we understand and at least have an overview of why the Silk Road was so unique and the technologies that was used in order that it was able to accomplish this free market. The idea behind a free market, first, as we define that, is that it is free from government control. So you and I would be able to exchange goods and services without taxation, without regulation, because we're 2 consenting adults that have decided to do this. Now, we're not condoning any of this stuff, but this is important that you understand the philosophy behind it if you're going to understand and be able to follow the story.
It's important to set the foundation because the story is very deep and interesting.
It is.
And we need to start here with what the Silk Road is, how it functioned, and what his philosophy was going into it.
Right. And so that's essentially it.
Yep.
That we should be able to do that. Now, as a libertarian, Ross did not feel like government control and regulations, taxation was theft, and all kinds of other things that belong to that particular political ideology. And as an ideologue, a 26-year-old Ross Ulbricht, who was a graduate with high honors, working at his PhD, ends up starting this website. Now, there's a lot of people that will conflate a couple of terms, and we want to make sure that we separate each and every one of those out so that we can understand what all the pieces of this are. So in order to access the Silk Road, you needed a few specific things. You needed the specific IP address for the Silk Road. You needed a Tor account, and you needed to be able to buy and sell with Bitcoin. So let's start at the beginning.
Yeah, which in 2011 was beginning.
Right. It was just in its infancy. A Bitcoin was only worth about 50 cents in 2011. Now, obviously, that's grown. If you were to look at current market rates, it's nearly $20,000 per Bitcoin. But back then, it was only about 50 cents per Bitcoin. And people were data mining Bitcoin by the thousands of coins. So if we were to go back and we're to look at these things, the first thing that you need is a specific IP address. Now, there's a lot of people that think about something like the Silk Road, or we hear the words the dark web, and we have had in research for this, we've had the opportunity to talk with a high-level internet security consultant. We sat down and talked with him. He doesn't want to be named, and so we'll refer to him lovingly. That's one of our favorite characters from the IT crowd. We're just going to call him Moss for the duration of these episodes. He might come on with us at some point in order to discuss things with us. But for now, what Moss has told us is this. Essentially, there is no such thing as the dark web. To put it in layman terms, what happens when you type in google.com or if you go to freeross.org, that takes you to a server that translates freeross.org into ones, zeros into numbers and letters that take you to the specific address where that lies on a server somewhere. However, if you were to type in that same series of numbers and letters into your URL in your browser, it would take you to the exact same place. So there is no such thing as the dark web. There is essentially only the internet. It's just a matter of...
There's just areas that are harder to access.
Exactly. And they're not even things that are dealing with nefarious content. It's just something that people would use to be private. There's a lot of like family chats, for instance, that have to do with that. A lot of email servers use specific addresses like that have, you don't go to hotmail.com or gmail.com. You got to type in 1.92.785,
MySpace.com.
right, in order to get to these secure email servers. And so there's a lot of these things that we don't think about that we're familiar with. The first time you set up a company email on your cell phone, you might have to go through and jump through several hoops in order to make that happen. But essentially, it's the same type of thing. So the idea that the dark web exists in this nefarious world where it's these, only evil people that are using it is somewhat of a myth. It's something that we're being told in order that whenever we see things like the Silk Road, that we know and associate it with nefarious things, with, evil dealings. And
which there are those things that
and
go
to
on
be
there.
clear, there were a lot of illegal things bought and sold on the Silk Road. There's no way around it. But to say that it was some kind of deep, dark web thing, there were plenty of people who knew how to access it. And we'll get into one of those in particular here in just a minute. So the first thing is, there is no such thing as the dark web. This was just a thing that could be accessed from any URL. Now, one of the things, the safety features on it that it doesn't have is that while the non-aggression principle is fine for two consenting adults, if a 13-year-old were able to go to these sites, stumble across these same things, find a way to mine Bitcoin, he would have a non-traceable internet footprint in which he could buy and sell user amounts of narcotics on the Silk Road. Now, there were a lot of things that the admins did in order to try to prevent that, but you can't say completely that you could keep it out of the hands of a child, which is one of the reasons why Ross now says it was an irresponsible thing for him to do. So the first thing is, there's no such thing as the dark web. There's simply only the internet. How we access and how we use it is up to us. The second is Tor. And Tor is a simple acronym that means the Onion Router. Now, the Onion Router was something that was developed in the 1990s by the U.S. Navy. And essentially what it does is that if I want to access the internet from my computer via the Wi-Fi pings our router, and then it's traceable. If it pings that router into this office, if anybody were to look at my computer, they could see
There's
exactly
a
where
specific
I
IP
was, location at any time. As a matter of fact, because I'm hooked up with the Apple location services, my wife, if I'm on this computer, will be able to know exactly where I am because this computer is pinging that location. What the Onion Router did is it allowed for the U.S. Navy to be able to anonymously surveil different people in different organizations, different countries around the world. And that if somebody was trying to track where they were, what the Onion Router would do is it would route it and ping hundreds of different places. So, to put it in layman's terms, if I were to log on here, right, that it would, using the Onion Router, I would log on here at the office, and then it would ping the place across the street, and then it might ping a server in Iceland, and then back to South America, and then over to a lighthouse station in the middle of the UK. Anybody that was on Tor was being used as a way to route and transfer the locations of other people.
It obscures. It gives you privacy
Completely.
Yeah.
Because if anybody were to look at where it was that I was logging on, or if my wife was trying to check my location, it would, by the second...
Are you trying to hide from your wife?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
It would, by the second, change and make it look like I was in several locations, either at the same time or within moments of one another, all over the globe via the other computers that were using Tor. So it's just a way to mask your location so that you can surf the web in anonymity.
How does that differ from a VPN?
So it differs from a VPN in the way that it does it. Now, Moss has also told us that neither of these things, neither VPNs nor Tor, have been secure since 2010. Both have been able to be broken down not only by U.S. government agencies, but also by very, very, very low-level computer hackers now. Now, that is his business. He is in cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. And so he's dealing with these things because he works with organizations that have VPNs or use VPNs. Now, a VPN was more well-protected than what Tor was, because Tor was the predecessor to the modern-day VPN. But they're both extremely vulnerable even now. And a lot of what he's dealing with is making sure that people that are using VPNs are still protected while they're dealing with their businesses and things like that, because hackers are coming at them every day.
Yeah, VPN is a step to protect yourself. It's not a guarantee.
Right. Yeah. Which it's a step to add security for you versus anonymity for you. So there's a slight difference in the way that those things work. The last bit of technology that was used for the Silk Road, and probably the one that's most impactful and will carry so much of the narrative of this story, is the popular cryptocurrency Bitcoin. The Bitcoin, for those of you who don't know, is internet money. There's no other real way to put it. It's a decentralized currency, which means simply that if a person had Bitcoin, that they could buy and sell with it anonymously, because it's not tied to a bank account in a country.
Mm-hmm. It's decentralized. It's not tied to a financial institution.
Yeah. So if I wanted to give you $50 on Venmo or Zelle or PayPal, whatever, right, or a check, there's a trail that shows it came from me to you in one of those areas. However, if I were to give you 50 Bitcoin, right, I'm not going to give you $100,000, because that's it would amount to
deal.
No, that's nearly $1 million. 50 Bitcoin, right?
Okay.
So if I were to do that, that transfer would happen online through our Bitcoin wallets, which we would access through a PIN. It would be essentially laundered through a currency exchange that deals in cryptocurrencies, anonymously taken from me and given to you. Though we know the exchange happened, there's no way for anybody else to be able to actually track what's going on unless they worked for the company that transfers the money.
Which is why governments around the world are trying to figure out how to handle cryptocurrencies.
Cryptocurrency, right. So whether it's blockchain, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's
Dogecoin,
whatever that is, they are working and trying to find a way in order to track it as it goes from one person to the next. Because so many of the services that do that now are using anonymous models. Well, in the beginning, the Silk Road was designed to be a place, it was an open free market where people could anonymously buy and sell goods. Now, those goods could be anything.
Following the non-aggression principle, which we discussed already.
Absolutely. So
human trafficking, murder for hire, all of those things were not something that was allowed on the Silk Road.
Not at all, right? Child pornography was another thing that was not allowed on the Silk Road. And so the Silk Road had a few users, right? You had several hundred users at one time. And in 2011, it was started, and then a few months later, in June of 2011, as a matter of fact, June 1st, 2011, Gawker did a piece on the Silk Road. And one of the quotes from the Gawker article says, "It's Amazon if Amazon sold mind-altering chemicals." Now, the thing with Gawker that they focus on...
Sounds like something Joe Rogan would love.
It really does. And they are selling Molly and the things like that Joe Rogan talks about on a consistent basis, right? So one of the things that the Silk Road did so well was keep everybody anonymous, which meant that early on people realized that this would be a great way to buy and sell illegal goods. Now, again, following the non-aggression principle, we've gone over all of the things that couldn't be sold. However, you could get marijuana, methamphetamines, MDMA. You could get black tar heroin if you wanted in user quantities, right? So in June of 2011, Gawker reaches out to a person known as Silk Road Admin. Now, Silk Road admin, we now have come to know, is Ross Ulbricht. Ross Ulbricht is, in June of 2011, he is Silk Road admin. And the Silk Road admin has two specific quotes here in this article from Gawker. The first is that our community is amazing. Silk Road, it says that the people are generally bright, honest, and fair. They're very understanding and willing to cooperate with each other. Now, the following paragraph, it says the sellers feel free, comfortably, openly trading hardcore drugs because the real identity of those involved in the Silk Road transactions are utterly obscured. And so the authorities are trying to figure out what's going on. So the authorities have been made aware of the Silk Road. The other quote from this article says that the state, now remember, this is, at this point, this is June 1st, 2011 is when this article comes out. So we know that this is Ross that's saying this. Ross says, the state is the primary source of violence, oppression, theft, and all forms of coercion. Stop funding the state with your tax dollars and direct your productive energies into the black market. All right, so remember, this is a 26-year-old ideologue who's saying these things. One of the things he goes on to say, as people are constantly berating the Silk Road admin and saying things like, how is it that you're doing this? You're ruining people's lives, and on and on. What the Silk Road admin goes on to say is this, is that what he's trying to do is create a community where it is safer for people to exchange these types of goods. That a person who's an addict is going to go get methamphetamines. If they want it, they can go and find it anywhere. What the Silk Road does is it changes that interaction from being a face-to-face interaction with a potentially violent drug dealer, which those things are pretty synonymous, right? Violent drug dealers is not something that we're unfamiliar with, or that if we were to hear that would be like, no.
Yeah, we mentioned El Chapo, who got one life sentence in 20 years.
Right, but
half of what Ross got.
A litany of violent crimes in his past. Even if this was a misguided attempt, right? It does seem as though, from a person-to-person philosophical viewpoint that of non-aggression, that the kid's heart is in the right place. Now, we're not saying that in order to excuse actions and say that the Silk Road was a great idea by any stretch of the imagination. But if that's the reason that he's doing it, and that's the philosophy that's governing what he's doing, there is a world in which that makes sense. Now, likewise, there is a world in which it makes sense for Thanos to snap his fingers and eliminate half the population because everybody, even the villain, is the hero of their own story. Because in their mind, they have a rational, logical, linear plan that makes sense in order for the greater good or whatever, right? So this isn't to...
Spider-Man dies.
Right. This isn't to excuse any of those things. Rather, what it is to just do one more piece of shedding some light on this. We say those things because those are verifiable things that Ross said. That the 26-year-old Ross, as the Silk Road admin, said. Ross, quoted here from 2011, says that people should have the right to buy and sell whatever they wanted as long as they aren't hurting anyone else. Now, once this Gawker article gets published, the Silk Road goes from hundreds of users to hundreds of thousands of users, as more and more people are discovering it. Now, remember, this isn't something that's readily available and easy enough for you and I to get onto. But
I can't go to silkroad.com.
Right. But Gawker publishes in there a link to a URL which gives you information about how to log on to the Silk Road, how to start your Tor account, and how to do this. So they gave access to internet novices on how to get onto the Silk Road. Now, we're not saying that Gawker is necessarily implicit in this, but the type of rag that they run is not one where they're trying to keep everybody in a righteous and prudent state of mind so that they can all look wonderful to their peers and friends and family. They are, in essence, saying, hey, check out this cool thing where we found out how to exchange drugs. Also, here's a URL in case, anybody might stumble
Yeah.
upon it.
Yeah.
Like, if you want access to
We're not
this...
telling you to go, but if you were so inclined...
Right. They didn't open the door,
Yeah.
but if you didn't know that the door was there, they showed it to you.
Yeah.
Right. One of the people that has done an interview on this said they likened it to Diagon Alley from the Harry Potter books. Right. The Diagon Alley was this incredible place where all of these shops were that was in this like back alleyway, and you had to tap a few bricks in order to get there. As a matter of fact, if you go to Universal Studios, on the studio side, right, you can walk past Diagon Alley and never know that it's there because it's just a brick wall. However, if you see somebody come out of it or go into it, you realize as you get closer to the brick wall that there's an entrance and an exit. If you don't know that it's there, you'll walk past it. Now, in the back is this huge, vast thing where there's people and like a dragon guarding a bank, and there's all kinds of rides in Diagon Alley, but you don't know it's there. If you're just casually walking by, you would absolutely miss it. And essentially what Gawker does is Gawker shows now hundreds of thousands of people where the door is to the marketplace. They don't open it for you, but they show you where it is. And it's the same as that discovery of...
If it's somebody like me and you hear that there's a thing called Diagon Alley where you can find great things, you can also get in huge trouble.
Right.
It's tempting to not go explore.
Yeah. Whether or not you purchase anything there, at the very least, you want to go and check it out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Amazon for... I mean, essentially what they're saying is Amazon for mind-altering chemicals, right?
Among other things, yeah.
But that's the quote from the Gawker article.
Yeah.
So why not go check it out, right? I don't know how many times I've bought the game StarCraft over the course of my life,
Me too.
right?
Yeah.
But I would rather not have to pay the extra $1 to buy the StarCraft disc for $10. I'd rather just download it for $8. And if I can do that with Bitcoin anonymously and save a couple of bucks, that is appealing. This is not a nefarious thing, but it circumvents a lot of the system, which would, in my eyes, just cost me more money, right? Now, that's what Ross created.
Yep, he created Diagon Alley.
He created, and that might be a great way to put it. The Silk Road was, in essence, this type of Diagon Alley. But the main thing that was transferred, the main thing that was sold on there were personal use size packages of marijuana. Now, these were incredibly well placed.
In fact, we both have an acquaintance that has admitted to purchasing some of that off of the Silk Road.
Yes. And so they came really cleverly packaged, right? Because that was part of the deal. So you would find in, for instance, a DVD case that you'd open up a FedEx package and pull out the DVD case. Inside the DVD case would be a baggie with your drugs in it. Now, Mitch Hedberg, years and years and years ago, we're both familiar with this, made a joke about how the FedEx man is the greatest drug dealer because he doesn't know what he's doing and he's always on time. And so the idea of buying and selling drugs by mail is not something that's new. Hedberg was talking about it prior to 2006. I believe he passed away somewhere in that time period. And so now we're looking at, 5 or 6 years later. So this is a known way in order to send and receive drugs. The Silk Road has opened up a new way to do it. However, one of the issues that Ross was having was that he was unable to figure out the purchasing piece. Ross was not a computer programmer by trade. And he figures out how to create a Tor account. He figures out how to create this marketplace. He discovers that Bitcoin is going to be the primary currency that's used, but he doesn't know how to work the transactions. So Ross reaches out to a friend of his named Richard Bates. Now, again, everything that we're talking about here is in the public record. So versus going to all of these different articles like Gawker and Wired and all that in order to get our information, let's look at what the courts have actually said happened, what people have said under oath, and see what conclusion that leads us to. Ross and Richard Bates have been friends for a long time. Ross goes to Richard. He won't tell him the nature of the project he's working on for 2 reasons. 1, because he doesn't want to get called out by his friend. And 2, because if his friend realizes everything that's going on and what he's doing, right, it might put his friend at risk. Ross is not unaware that the circumvention of the regular market is something that will not get you prosecuted. He understands fully that. I mean, even in the Gawker article, he calls it a black market. We need to get away from the government-regulated markets and do our business in the black market. From that standpoint, he understands what he's created.
He understood it was a risk. It wasn't something that was risk-free.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, I can't reiterate this enough, how much now he looks back on that and says, that was a bad idea. Mm-hmm. And we'll see if we follow this story. It might not have been very long after he started the Silk Road where he began down that road and saying this was a bad idea. So Richard helps Ross create a way in order to exchange currency. Richard works for PayPal and eBay, which are now the same organization. And so in so doing, he initially helps Ross, and I'll quote here, Ross initially asked Bates specific questions without revealing the nature of the project, but when Bates insisted, Ross finally told him about the Silk Road. Bates offered him some help, but distanced himself, citing concerns over being targeted by law enforcement. As time went on, Ross became more and more stressed and overwhelmed by the Silk Road and turned to an online anonymous stranger he met through the site. So this is where the story really starts to take a turn. I mean, up until this point, it's very e-commerce. There's a lot of stuff about ways you can be anonymous on the internet and all of these things that sound like great and geeky, and that's something that I want my IT guy to know about, but it's not something that I need to worry about, right? Moss needs to know about that stuff so that he can make sure that my stuff isn't bought and sold, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time worrying about those things. Ross starts to get overwhelmed with everything that's going on. The community's starting to grow. There is a very, very robust chat forum that has popped up on the Silk Road as people are creating usernames, talking back and forth with one another, and one person reaches out to Ross. And in an article from Forbes in 2013, this article from Forbes, is from August of 2013. So this is right before the trial for Ross begins. Forbes reaches out to the new Silk Road admin. And this guy starts to tell them about how he acquired the Silk Road. As Ross is having this new stress that he's under, an anonymous source reaches out to him and says, look, you've got a problem with your Bitcoin wallets. There's a security risk, and if you don't fix it, there are people who are going to be able to anonymously take money from other people that they will never be able to track down or get back because of the nature of the site that you're running. So to quote here, I discovered a big vulnerability in the way that he had configured the main Bitcoin wallet that was being used to process all the deposits and withdrawals on the site. So in this interview with Forbes magazine, it says, I didn't start the Silk Road, and you can tell me if this begins to sound a little bit familiar. I didn't start the Silk Road. My predecessor did. From what I understand, it was the original idea to combine Bitcoin and Tor to create an anonymous market. Everything was in place. He just put the pieces together. This is the first time I've ever stated publicly that I did not start it. I'd rather not say exactly when, mostly for his sake, but it was a transition that took time. I was in his corner from early on, and eventually it made sense for me to take the reins. He was well compensated and happy with our arrangement. It was his idea to pass the torch, in fact. We met through the site. I discovered a big vulnerability in the way he had configured the main Bitcoin wallet that was being used to process all the deposits and withdrawals on the site. At first he ignored me, but I persisted and gained his trust by helping him secure the wallet. From there, we became close friends working on the Silk Road together. The most I am willing to reveal is that I am not the first administrator of the Silk Road. So Ross makes a transition in November, on November 11th, 2011.
This is his username, right?
Ross informed Richard Bates, and there's record of this, the guy that created or helped Ross with the currency exchange. He said, I'm no longer in charge of the Silk Road. And as he told Bates in an online chat, that I'm glad it's not my problem anymore.
Yep. I read that.
4 months later, on February the 6th, 2011, the new owner of the Silk Road reveals his name as the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Which we've already established has the backstory of a long line of continually handing over the reins to continue the lineage, the mythos, like you mentioned.
In June of 2011, while Ross is still at the helm, in Chicago, there is a Homeland Security agent that goes by the name of Jared Duryagan. Now, I say goes by the name. That is his name.
We need to spell that out.
Yeah, Jared Duryagan at DER-YEGHIAYAN. Now, this is we're saying Duryagan. That's how we're showed that it's pronounced. After the Gawker article comes out, he starts apprehending some interesting packages. And these packages contain personal use amounts of narcotics. With the Dread Pirate Roberts now firmly at the helm of the Silk Road, Homeland Security in Chicago has the target of the Silk Road investigation that they've been working on now for the last 8 months. And so Duryagan starts pursuit of the Dread Pirate Roberts. And that's where we'll pick up in episode 2 of the Rev and Rep Investigates, the untold story of Ross Ulbricht and the Silk Road.
Please stop. You are hurting me. Please stop. You know what you're saying isn't true. You are hurting me, and you're hurting my family. Please stop.